My son died from overtraining and starvation, all because a girl convinced him he was never good enough. I won't stay silent. It was early morning when I first realized something was wrong. There hadn't been a sound. Not the creak of a door, not the hum of the fridge. Just silence. The house was too still, unnaturally so. Jake's bedroom door stood wide open, and his bed was untouched. The pillow lay flat, the sheets smoothed over as if no one had ever slept there. It looked staged, as if someone had deliberately erased the signs of a person having lived in that room. I moved through the house, calling his name. There was no answer. I checked the bathroom, the kitchen, and even the garage, but each search turned up empty. Just as a tight knot of anxiety began to form in my chest, I heard something faint coming from the backyard. A soft, rhythmic thudding, like fists or feet hitting the ground in steady, relentless intervals. Following the sound, I walked out into the cold morning and toward the shed. That old wooden structure had once held Jake's childhood toys, his training wheels, his camping gear. Now it was mostly empty. Just a rolled up mat, a set of dusty weights, and a film of neglect clinging to the corners. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stood in the threshold. Jake was on the floor, shirtless, his skin glistened with sweat. He was in the middle of push-ups. Slow, brutal, exacting. His arms trembled with each repetition, but he didn't stop. His breath came in sharp, controlled bursts. It didn't look like exercise. It looked like punishment. I stood there silently, frozen in place as he pushed through his 60th rep, then his 65th. Finally, he looked up at me, eyes dark and unreadable. Dad. I need to talk to you, he said between gasps, not stopping. We didn't go back into the house. He sat down right there, leaning against the shed wall, legs stretched out, arms limp at his sides. His breathing slowed, but the tension in his body didn't fade. His eyes were heavy, not with fatigue alone, but with something deeper. Something knotted and pressed down hard inside him. Then he spoke, and his voice was flat. There was no drama, no emotion, only cold, unembellished truth. Sarah, his ex-girlfriend, had shown up at basketball practice the day before. She was with Trevor, the team captain, and now her boyfriend. She was wearing Jake's hoodie, the one he lived in during the fall, the one that smelled like shampoo and sweat and late-night study sessions. She handed it to Trevor, who slipped it on and flexed. When Jake asked for it back, Sarah laughed. She said it looked better on someone with muscle. The team laughed with her. Jake didn't tell me how it made him feel. He didn't need to. I could see it in the tight line of his jaw, in the way his gaze never wavered, in the way he refused to blink, as though crying would prove them right. I'm done being the joke, he said. I'm done being invisible. I'm changing everything. I wanted to reach for him. To tell him he didn't need to change for anyone. That he was enough exactly as he was. But he wasn't looking for comfort. He wasn't asking for advice. He was declaring war. On his own reflection, on his history, on the part of himself he thought had failed, and some part of me, unsure, afraid, desperate, clung to the idea that maybe he needed this. Maybe this drive, this obsession, would lead to something positive. Maybe he would find discipline, structure, resilience. But within 2 weeks, it was clear this wasn't about growth. It was about erasure. He dropped nearly 20 pounds. His skin began to cling to the outlines of his bones. His teachers called, saying he could barely stay awake in class. I found the log on his phone, 4 other runs, weightlifting before school, another gym session afterward. His meals were stripped of everything but function. Egg whites, steamed spinach, grilled chicken, no oil, no flavor, no pleasure. When I asked him why, he didn't pause. Success takes sacrifice, he said, his voice calm and practiced. It didn't sound like my son. It sounded like someone else. Someone who had studied the rules of masculinity and was now performing them to the letter. Even if it killed him, I tried to be supportive. I offered to train with him. I cooked meals packed with nutrients. I suggested movies, road trips, distractions, but none of it reached him. He stopped smiling. He stopped laughing. He began to move through the world like a ghost in his own life. One night, I found him outside under the porch light in the bitter cold, doing burpees past midnight. I stood there, like stunned. What are you doing? I asked, not hiding the concern in my voice. He didn't even pause to look at me. I had birthday cake at school, he said. I don't deserve to sleep. His voice was even, unapologetic. He truly believed that one piece of cake had to be repaid with suffering. A few days later, his grandmother came by with a tray of homemade lasagna. Jake used to beg for it when he was little. She placed it on the table gently, smiling, hopeful. Jake didn't lift his eyes. He sat across from her with his plastic container of dry chicken and vegetables. When she offered him a serving, he declined. I can't eat that. I need results. She stood up quietly and walked into the hallway. I found her a few minutes later wiping tears from her face with the back of her hand. Jake hadn't seen her cry, but I had. And that was when I stopped pretending. This wasn't about health. It wasn't about fitness or self-improvement or heartbreak. This was about shame, about trying to punish himself into becoming someone the world wouldn't humiliate again. And all of it had started with a hoodie, the days after the lasagna incident settled into an eerie stillness. Jake and I moved around the house like strangers orbiting a shared memory. There wasn't anger, at least not the kind that shouted, just a thick, quiet distance. Like he was barricading himself behind a wall of silence, and I didn't know the passcode anymore. He had turned his body into a project. Every bite was measured, every step accounted for. I started finding hand-drawn spreadsheets taped to his bedroom wall, color-coded blocks from 4 in the morning until 10:30 at night, with time carved out for cardio, weight training, supplements, journaling, and controlled sleep. His meals became sterile arrangements of grilled chicken, steamed broccoli, and calorie-counted almonds. Everything was exact. There was no room for accidents, no room for joy. When I suggested a weekend with family, he declined. I can't afford to fall behind, he said, eyes not angry, but sharp, cutting in a way that dared me to challenge the logic. I didn't. Not then. I told myself this was a phase, maybe a harsh one, but temporary, like a storm that would pass if I just waited it out. One evening, I came home from work and found him sitting in the garage with his shirt off, filming himself while doing chin-ups on a beam we had once used to hang Christmas lights. A ring light. Borrowed from a classmate. I assumed Vassines cast shadows on his ribcage. I stood in the doorway and watched him. He didn't see me at first. When he finally noticed, he paused the recording and wiped his face. "What are you doing?" I asked, not with judgment, just confusion. "Progress tracking," he replied. "I need to see what I look like when I'm not posing." His answer was so rehearsed it felt like someone else was speaking through him. "And why do you need to do that?" He looked down for a moment, then gave me the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Because she's watching." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. That night, I sat at the foot of my bed long after Jake had gone to sleep, holding a photo of his mother in my hands. Her face smiled up at me with the same eyes Jake carried, though hers had always held something softer. She had battled her own demons, quietly, politely, the way women are often taught to. She had fought for years against an eating disorder that nobody outside the family even knew existed. To the world, she was radiant. Inside her home, she was starving herself in plain sight. Jake was 11 when he found her collapsed in the kitchen. I had never told him the whole truth. The doctors had said it was organ failure, that years of malnutrition had finally caught up to her. But I tried to shield Jake from the details, tried to offer him a version of the story that didn't involve blame or guilt. I thought I was protecting him, but I was wrong. Because several days later, I found his notebook. It was tucked behind the dresser, hidden under a stack of old binders. I hadn't intended to violate his privacy, but something in me knew I needed to look. Call it paternal instinct or desperation, but maybe both. What I found inside wasn't just a journal. It was a ledger. The pages were filled with food logs, body measurements, quotes. Not from motivational figures, but from Sarah. Direct lines, word for word. Things she had said about his appearance, about his body, about what real boys looked like. But what broke me wasn't her voice. It was his. Scrawled across the second page, circled twice, underlined with angry slashes, were the words, "My mom knew I was fat and never told me." I read it again and again, hoping I was wrong. That he hadn't meant it that way, that maybe it was a joke, but it wasn't. It was an accusation. To him, her final words. "You're perfect just the way you are," had become a lie, a betrayal. He believed that if she had been honest, if she had just told him to change, maybe he would have been strong enough. Maybe she wouldn't have died. Maybe Sarah wouldn't have left. Maybe he would be worthy. Grief had rewritten her love as silence, her comfort as cowardice. Later that night, I made dinner. His childhood favorite baked salmon with garlic green beans and sweet potatoes. He sat at the table and stared at his protein container, refusing to eat. "Jake," I said gently, "I want you to talk to someone." He didn't resist. He just nodded. Not with relief, not with trust, just resignation. It was the silence that scared me, the kind that doesn't beg for help, the kind that believes help isn't deserved. For a short while, I thought we were turning a corner. Jake was going to therapy, consistently and without complaint. He didn't talk about the sessions much, big calm, but he went, and in the world of teenage boys, that alone felt like a breakthrough. His appetite returned in small ways. Half a banana at breakfast, a few bites of scrambled eggs, small gestures that gave me hope. He even smiled once during a joke I made, not a laugh, but the kind of tight-lipped grin that reminded me of who he used to be. Dr. Liam, his therapist, told me privately that Jake was one of the most emotionally compartmentalized boys he'd worked with. Highly intelligent, emotionally internalized, incredibly self-critical. He said it like a diagnosis. He also said progress would be slow and non-linear. I told him I'd take slow. I just wanted to keep moving forward. One Friday afternoon, I came home early from work and found Jake outside, shooting hoops alone in the driveway. He wasn't training, not really. He wasn't counting reps or checking his form. He was just playing. No timer, no intensity. Just the sound of rubber against concrete and the rare sound of his breath in rhythm. For those 10 minutes, I let myself believe we were healing. But healing doesn't come in a straight line. It coils back on itself, folds, hides, and then explodes. The call came at 5:47 a.m. on a Sunday. It was the police. They had found Jake near the edge of Miller Lake, half submerged, shivering, hypothermic, and completely alone. A jogger had seen him first, doing laps in near freezing water. The officers had tried to pull him out, but he resisted. He kept muttering the same thing, over and over, "I'm not weak anymore. Tell Sarah I'm not weak." By the time I reached the hospital, he was unconscious. Machines surrounded him. V drips, heart monitors, warming blankets, oxygen tubes. His body temperature had dropped dangerously low. One of the nurses told me he'd asked the paramedics to measure his body fat percentage on the way in. She said it with tears in her eyes. He wasn't trying to die, not the way people think. He was trying to prove himself worthy. To Sarah, to himself, to the version of Jake he thought deserved to be loved. His hands were cold when I held them, his ribs pressed through the hospital gown like branches against fabric. And then she walked in. Sarah. She arrived like she owned the place. Jake's hoodie wrapped around her like a trophy. Her makeup was perfectly smudged, mascara dripping just enough to seem accidental. And trailing behind her, as always, was Trevor. She looked at me and said, "I didn't mean for this. I was honest. About the hoodie. That's all." Before I could say anything, Jake stirred. His eyes opened slowly, fluttering against the fluorescent lights above. For a moment, there was recognition. Then he saw her. He saw the hoodie. His lips curled into a smile. Not the kind that lights up a room, the kind that chills it. "Of course you're wearing it," he whispered. Then louder. "Of course you are." Then came the laughter. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was sharp and cracked and terrifying. The sound echoed off the walls, raw and hollow. Sarah flinched. Trevor looked stunned. Nurses rushed in, trying to calm him. Sarah backed away, and still. Jake laughed until the sound broke into coughing, then sobbing, then silence. They sedated him. Later that night, he woke again. Angry, confused, fighting the feeding tube. "It's making me fat," he whispered. His voice was distant, unrecognizable. His body was too weak to fight, but his mind wouldn't let go. At 2:09 a.m., his heart stopped. They brought him back. At 2:53, it happened again. They revived him a second time, but this time his kidneys had begun to fail. His heart beat irregularly. His body, pushed past every limit, was collapsing. At 3:30 a.m., Jake opened his eyes one last time. He looked at me, not with fear or confusion, but clarity. And in a voice no louder than breath, he asked, "Dad, am I skinny enough now?" I took his hand and told him the one truth I should have said every single day since the moment Sarah walked into his life. "You were always enough." He held my gaze for a long second. Then, so softly I almost didn't hear it, he said, "Don't lie to me like Mom did," and then he was gone. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest due to severe malnutrition and hypothermia. But that's not what killed my son. What killed him was a slow erasure of self. Bit by bit, word by word, until he believed he didn't deserve food, rest, warmth, or love. And now the only warmth left was the blood still circulating in my hands as I made a silent vow. Sarah would answer for what she had done, and Jake's story would not be rewritten by someone else ever again. I didn't go home right after Jake died. I couldn't. The thought of walking through the front door, seeing his shoes by the mat, smelling whatever was left of his shampoo on the towels. It made my chest cave in. Instead, I parked in front of the funeral home and sat in the silence of my car until my fingers went numb against the steering wheel. But I wasn't still. My mind raced, unable to settle. Grief didn't feel like grief yet. It felt like static, like unfinished business vibrating through my ribs. Out of habit, or maybe madness. I opened my phone and pulled up Sarah's Instagram profile. And there she was, wrapped in Jake's hoodie, the same one from the fall, the one he never let out of his sight. Her makeup was perfectly smudged, just enough to suggest a long, teary night. The caption read, "R.I.P. Jake. You'll always be my heart." Her face was tilted just slightly, eyes glassy but not red, hair loose but clean. Mourning with precision. In the next slide, she adjusted the filter. In another, she added a poem that wasn't hers. With each swipe, her grief became more curated, more cinematic. Then I saw it. Near the cuff of the left sleeve, a faint, reddish stain. I remembered it instantly. It was ketchup from the burger I'd convinced Jake to eat 3 nights before the lake. He had laughed that night, only once, when the sauce landed on his sleeve. Now it was on Sarah, branded like a prop in her performance. I got out of the car, walked straight to the funeral home's back entrance, and stood outside long enough for the crowd to take notice. Sarah was there already, surrounded by friends. She saw me and pulled the hoodie tighter around herself like armor. I walked up calmly. "I'd like Jake's hoodie back," I said. Her face fell into place instantly. Eyes widened, chin quivered. She pressed the sleeve to her cheek like it was soaked in meaning. "It's all I have left of him," she whispered. Please don't take it." Her friends bristled like I'd slapped her. Before I could respond, Trevor stepped between us. The same Trevor who wore that hoodie like a joke. "You need to let people grieve their own way, what?" he said. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at her. And for just a second, Sarah's mask slipped. Her eyes cleared, her lips curled. Not into a smile, but something smug, something triumphant. Then she leaned close, so only I could hear. Jake always wanted to look like Trevor. She stepped back before I could react. Her eyes glistened again, ready for the next act. I walked away. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I went home, walked into Jake's room, and stood there for a long time. The air smelled like him. The bed was made by us. Everything was neat. Neat. Like he'd been preparing to disappear. Then I saw it. Wedged between 2 textbooks on his desk was a worn, frayed notebook. I opened it, expecting a therapist's prompts or scattered teenage thoughts, but what I found was a record. Every page was cataloged, dated, methodical. He had documented everything. Not just Sarah's cruelty, but her precision. November 12th. "You walk weird?" December 3rd. "Wait in the car. I'll come get you when the others are inside." January 19th. "You're like a practice boyfriend. I'll know how to be better with someone else." There were screenshots taped in, transcripts of conversations, even logs of how long it took him to recover from each incident. This wasn't a journal. It was a case file. He wasn't venting, he was preparing. Because on some level, Jake knew no one would believe him unless he could prove it. When I reached the last page, my chest felt crushed by the weight of it all. Sarah hadn't just broken him. She had studied him, dismantled him, reduced him to a shadow of himself, all while the world clapped for her grief. And that's when I made my decision. She could keep the hoodie. I had the truth, and I would make sure the world saw what she had done. After I finished reading Jake's journal, I stayed in his room long after the sun had gone down, frozen by the realization that he had spent months documenting his slow unraveling, alone. His handwriting, so careful and measured, painted a portrait of cruelty, not in sudden bursts of violence, but in small, cutting remarks that, over time, had reduced my son to a shell of himself. The longer I sat there, the more I realized this wasn't just grief. It was a roadmap, a pattern. I wanted to march over to Sarah's house, throw the notebook onto her family's kitchen table, and demand they read every line aloud. But I knew that would be useless. Sarah was too practiced, too skilled at hiding behind soft-spoken charm and mascara-smeared sorrow. I had watched her twist sympathy into protection. She could cry on command, play the role of the tragic girlfriend with unsettling ease. If I confronted her directly, I would be dismissed as just another grieving father unable to cope with loss. So instead, I followed Jake's example. I began gathering proof. I started with Sarah's social media. Screenshot after screenshot. Photos of her lighting candles, captions calling Jake her forever soulmate, videos of her playing soft music over montages of them together. The performance was pristine, but when I compared these posts to Jake's journal entries, the contrast was staggering. On the very day she posted a heart emoji over his photo, Jake had written about being excluded from a party she attended with Trevor. One post claimed she never saw the signs, yet Jake had included text messages where he clearly said, "I'm not okay." The more I looked, the more contradictions emerged. Sarah had begun selling memorial bracelets. Thin silicone bands that read, "How'd do it for Jake?" $15 each. She set up a table outside the school gates, posed with a senior photo I had taken of Jake, and smiled as people handed her cash. I asked the school whether they had approved the fundraiser. The principal shrugged and called it a beautiful initiative. I said nothing. I walked away. But I made a note. That night, my sister called. She said people were starting to whisper. They said I looked angry. They said I was making people uncomfortable. She suggested I speak to someone, a counselor, a pastor, anyone. I knew what she really meant. Sarah was winning the narrative. She had become the broken girl whose boyfriend died tragically. And I, the man who asked too many questions, was beginning to look unhinged. But I didn't stop. I searched every drawer in Jake's room, every pocket of every backpack, every stack of notebooks. In one zippered pouch, I found a photo of the basketball team. Hearts were drawn around Trevor's face. Not Jake's, not by Jake, by Sarah. Her handwriting was unmistakable. And in one old homework folder, I found a set of physics notes clearly written by Jake. Crisp, intelligent, carefully formatted. I remembered seeing them posted on Sarah's Instagram weeks earlier, framed as proof that Jake had been tutoring her, that their bond was built on learning and trust. But now I understood the truth. She hadn't asked for help. She had taken his work, posted it as her own, and built a lie on top of it. Then, a message came from Alexandra. She had once been Sarah's best friend. Her message was short, nervous. "I'm scared of her. I've seen her do this before." 10 minutes later, the message was deleted, but I had already taken a screenshot. I reached out to Trevor's parents next. At first, they were guarded. But after I showed them a few entries from Jake's journal, something shifted. They invited me into their home. Over tea, they told me that Trevor had changed during his time with Sarah. He became more anxious, more secretive. He stopped making eye contact. His mood swung wildly. His mother said she didn't know what had caused it. But now she suspected she did, one by one. The pieces began falling into place. Sarah wasn't mourning Jake. She was using him. Her posts weren't expressions of grief. They were part of a brand. Carefully selected fonts, filter palettes, hashtags like mental health, awareness, and forever in my heart. Always accompanied by a donation link or a call for support. She curated her sadness, polished it, made it palatable. But Jake had made one mistake. He left behind the truth, not just in his journal, but in his habits, in his meticulous documentation, in his refusal to forget even the smallest slight. And now, that truth belonged to me, or had rewritten the story. But she didn't count on the boy who wrote everything down. And she didn't count on a father who had nothing left to lose.